So years ago, I heard a quote and it went along the lines of, don't assume, because to do so you make an ass out of you and me. And if you really put your ear to that quote, it's actually kind of funny because the statement itself is an assumption. Like the only thing that's going to happen is I'm going to make an ass out of myself, or I'm going to make an ass out of you. And nobody wants to do that, right? No one wants to make an ass out of oneself or somebody else for that matter. But although there is some merit to that idea, the reality is in life, how many have already learned that you can't help but be put in a position where assumptions have to be made? And so it's not a matter of avoiding assumptions altogether, right? But it's how do we manage that gap between what we know to be true and what we start to assume might be true, and making sure we bring the best version to the story as possible, the most accurate version to the story. And in fact, in my practice and talking to people, I've learned that assumptions are quite a bit of the reality of the framing of the story that people not only tell themselves, but because they tell themselves that, it formulates some of their beliefs, and then out of their beliefs is their behavior, good, bad, or indifferent. And so as we sort of take a step back and pull that all apart, it's teaching people, okay, how do I bridge that gap between what I know to be true and what I don't yet know to be true, and have that story being told. And so as I've talked to people about this, they'll say, Steph, you really need to say more about it, because I've learned that there are some things we can learn in putting that information together when we are put in a position to make an assumption. And assumptions exist not just in our personal and private life, but they also can exist in public life. I mean, that's where a hypothesis comes about. That's how we've, cured different diseases, is because we've had a bit of an assumption. If we do A, B, and C, or if we test A, B, and C, this will happen. And so assumptions are something that I believe that people can learn to do well, so that it can serve them well as they bring their best self to their families and to their workplaces, and really every relationship. So we're going to talk about assumptions over the next couple of weeks, but I first want to start by clarifying what is an assumption. What is a good assumption? What is a bad assumption? What do you want to avoid when making an assumption? And so an assumption really it's a gap of information. Like, you just don't have the facts to fill it out, and that in fact says, okay, that's what an assumption isn't. An assumption isn't a fact. It's actually, okay, I think this might be true. It's more of a hunch. Sometimes it's a shot in the dark, right? But at the end of the day, an assumption lacks proof, but that needs to be a temporary sort of thing. I've been known to make assumptions, but yet go and get clarification. If you know me, you know I ask questions. In fact, I learned as a little girl, asking questions would often frustrate people, but I like to believe it's one of the best things I can bring to a situation. I don't ask questions to frustrate, I ask questions to get clarification. Why? Because I believe that as we get clarification, we can draw closer to each other, and ultimately that's what life is about, right? It's about living life at peace with one another. And so we are going to talk about what is a dangerous assumption. How do those come about? What part of my experience, my life experience, is really part of the framework of this assumption? Because if we operate too much out of dangerous assumptions, we find ourselves really not just destructive to how we view ourselves, but we can be very destructive in our relationship with others. And then there's the generous assumption. That's my fallback, is, okay, how can I in this relationship or this experience that I'm having have the most generous assumption? Because it's not a huge bent toward optimism, like to fairy tale living, but the truth is that I find it's better to be generous an assumption, and as you start to work through, and then there's the working assumption, which is really going through the steps so that you can remove the gap of information but pursue getting the information in a way that brings peace and connectedness, because isn't that what it's about now, is getting connectedness, not just in my authentic self or in your authentic self, but connectedness to one another, because that just makes life worth living. And so I hope you join me on this little conversation journey we're going to have over the couple weeks, because at the end, I'm believing there will be no asses left on the floor or found in our future, but we're going to learn how to bridge the gap of information in the best way possible. So hope to talk to you soon.